Wa lumgoda now ninsen. Skugod like some thlorum newsum at a auch shoet oayu. O uxt amadi de wat watku. Amechs lucubus cosalish musquim Squamish at a slewatu de wat tuggen. Oirsum heichka, heitzapka, hoichka, musquim Squamish at a slewatooth neget go. In Somalia, my language, I have introduced myself by my real names. Simthlorum Nusum is my Tsimshian name. Tauch Shawet is my Thlinket name. And I'm from Wuukst and Madir, Metlakatla, Alaska. Metlakatla, Alaska is the only Indian reserve in Alaska. I was born and raised on our beautiful island reserve. And I now live in beautiful and unceded Coast Salish territories. And I thank our Coast Salish relatives, raise my hands to our relatives for allowing me such an honor to be a guest for over 10 years now. It's my honor as well to introduce this panel. As Marie was sharing, this was a topic of this is related to the topic of my dissertation, which is looking at the process of collaboration between non-First Nations and First Nations dance artists specifically is what my dissertation focused on, and the way in which that protocol informs and structures the collaborative process. So I was really inspired by this morning's panel, and I was busy. I don't know if anyone can hear my fingers going 100 miles an hour, but I was writing the entire time because I just felt that the words that were shared were so powerful. So through the short amount of time that I have to introduce our panel, I'm going to weave a lot of the teachings from the last panel into my introduction. So I'd like to begin with something that Splash, Erin Nelson Moody, and Nancy Bleck in their introduction of Utstem witnessing. Nancy was talking about the process of working with First Nations artists and how integral to that process, she said, quote, doing a good job of getting out of the way. And I loved that's integral to the process. So working in collaboration with First Nations people to help create opportunities and then get out of the way. And not get out of the way in the negative sense, but really thinking about what that means to step aside, what that takes to step aside. To step aside is to have trust in the process, to have trust in us as First Nations people, that we will do the good work that needs to be done. And we're grateful for your support. But in that moment of stepping aside, you are supporting our self-determination. Our protocols are about our self-determination, meaning to govern ourselves by our own laws. Rosalind Williams, in her description of working with Kathy and Stubbington, she talked about beginning through building trust. It took over 6 years for them to start really working together, 6 years to build relationships prior to then beginning to produce their art together. It was conveyed through their description that Rosalind wanted to see who this person was again, to get over the feelings of, oh, here we go again. Some non-First Nations person wants to know more about us. To get over those sorts of feelings takes us getting to know you. But what is very rarely reciprocated is non-Indigenous people wanting to take the time to get to know us before starting the process of creating art. And this is partially due to the fact that we live in a time of immediacy. Everything needs to happen right now. But protocol, like being on the land, as was described by Nancy and Erin, It takes slowing down. It takes learning to engage with, to learn to engage with our protocol is the process of slowing down. In collaboration, protocol is the basis, the approach, the framework to building respectful relationships. Both Jordan Wilson and Sue Rowley talked about how institutional deadlines do not take into account the large amount of time that it really takes to do meaningful work in communities. I agree. Sue specifically said, we need to take the time to do things in a good way, and sometimes deadlines can stop us from doing that. I think all of us have been in that position. So to bring this back back to the Musqueam, I wrote this as I was sitting there, so I'm gonna be a little clumsy in a few parts of it. So getting back to the idea of self-determination, and that stepping aside doesn't enable, it creates space, it supports, because we're not looking for you to enable us. Self-determination is about us doing it for ourselves. But that, in the case studies that I've researched for my dissertation, however, you'd be very surprised at how fast non-Indigenous collaborators, arts administrators learn a little bit about protocol and then take it upon themselves to try to impose or enforce it. Our self-determination can be robbed from us just as our lands have, just as our generations of our children were very quickly. So slowing down, and also, may not go over so well in this room, essentially putting the privilege that you've had as settlers, privilege that you've had as non-Indigenous people in check and aside, and allowing for Indigenous ways of being, Indigenous laws to govern you. And in those moments, in that shift in power dynamics, true relationships are built with us and our territories. Jordan, during his description of the conversations around Sesnam amongst his elders, used a beautiful description that conversations encircled the room, and how he was in awe of their ability to listen attentively before responding. This is the part of why the process of collaboration takes so long. These conversations need to happen at length and not cut off by institutional deadlines. Those who have the honor of witnessing have a responsibility, as I am now, to be active listeners, to respond in ways that acknowledge what is shared. Giving them the time that they deserve, giving these conversations and collaborations the time that they deserve, not only enriches the process, but the end product, but most importantly, it strengthens relationships that are built. Our peoples are still primarily oral societies, so protocol happens face-to-face in front of witnesses, in private ceremonies, public events, in our homes every day, in our relationships every day, over kitchen tables. It is not negotiated over email. Permission does not come in the form of official letterhead. Protocol is a living, breathing entity. It lives and breathes in us. With a foundation of ancient ways of knowing, ways of being, and being in relation to each other and territories, we enact protocol purposefully to carry out our ancestors' ways, forward into our contemporary existence. One reason that many non-Indigenous people are intimidated by protocol, I've run into it again and again in the work that I do and my research, is that there are multiple understandings that coexist. We refer to them as different teachings. We come together when protocol is asserted, we come together and negotiate, and then the protocol is enacted. This process is where people may think of this process as conflict. It's really the process of refinement. The meaning and intention of the protocol is made it manifest. and that these are teachable moments where we're sharing our teachings with one another, we're sharing our teachings with non-First Nations people. Our ancestors could have never imagined the situations, the context, the political demands that we have to respond to today through our protocol. This is why protocol is a fluid, ever-changing, ever-responding entity, is that it's relevant. It's relevant to today through us. Splash referred to the song that he shared as a new composition, and bringing your attention to the ways that what you see in front of you, you can assume, many do assume through viewing, that it is ancient. Everything we do has an ancient foundation, but it doesn't mean that it isn't new. These new compositions, just as our totem poles reflect, for us northern people, reflect our history, these new compositions reflect our history. And when our children sing those songs, they sing that history just as when we sing our ancestors' songs, we sing the histories that they were referring to. It's a continuum. Protocol, in that same manner, has that power. It has the power to be this continuum that is relevant to our contemporary existence as 21st century Indigenous people. And these collaborations that were shared moments ago in the panel and the collaborations that will be shared now have the ability to teach you through demonstrating, as we did last night when we shared our Raven's Tail collaboration with Standing Wave, to teach you through showing you, as is our ancient practice. Our panel today, Crossing Cultures and Artistic Practice, will speak to some of these issues. We have 3 collaborators here in the areas of dance, Margaret Grenier and Karen Jamieson, theater, Renae Morriseau and Savannah Walling, and visual arts, and I didn't copy their names over, I feel so bad, but I have it in the other document. Hold on. So I get for writing this up right before I went on. Tracy Williams and Sharon Callis? Yeah. Callis? My apologies. So in closing in my portion, I want to acknowledge and reiterate a powerful observation that was made by Rosalind Williams. The arts are leaps and bounds ahead of political arenas. There's no way that I couldn't figure out in my dissertation how to argue this. But I really, truly believe that Vancouver, the city of Vancouver's declaration that they are occupying unceded Coast Salish territories would have never happened without the work of dance groups in Vancouver. That public stage, the public platform and arena that those of us that lead dance groups work in, every performance, when you're a guest in the territory, you're acknowledging the territories and where the performance happens, because we're always relevant to the context and the lands that we are on. So if I'm around the Burrard Reserve, I'm acknowledging the Tsleil-Waututh. If I'm in UBC, I'm acknowledging the Musqueam. If I'm over on the North Shore, I'm acknowledging the Squamish. When I'm here, overlapping territories, I'm acknowledging all 3. And not only is now the city of Vancouver acknowledging their occupation of unceded Coast Salish territories, which it's commendable, but there's still things about it that are very problematic, because they acknowledge also they state, counselors have been stated by the medium that they know that they don't have a role in land rights negotiations. So some of it is very tongue-in-cheek, but they are also moving forward to adopt appropriate protocols for acknowledging the land. And I believe that wouldn't happen without the arts. To understand the tremendous significance of protocol-based relationships that you've witnessed in the first panel, and that you're going to witness in this panel, I think it's important to leave you with the following question. In what other practices, artistic or otherwise, are settlers held accountable to Indigenous laws? So with that, thank you, and I will turn it over to Margaret Grenier and Karen Jamieson.
So Margaret, I'm not quite sure how far away or how close to keep this thing. Close. Okay. So Margaret suggested that I begin because our relationship is, speaking of time, as Miquel did, our relationship goes back 25 years to a piece called Gayani. But before Gayani, I did a piece called Rainforest. And that was, let me see, 1986. In this piece called Rainforest, I went to the Museum of Anthropology, absorbed images, ideas, concepts, was deeply inspired, and created a piece. In my understanding, I was bringing together my Western consciousness and this enormous mystery that it was inspiring me. The piece was, it was a pretty amazing piece on many levels, and it was a hit. It was a hit for quite a while. People came back 5 times. I was invited to do this piece at the Museum of Anthropology. Then I was uninvited. I was sent a letter by Michael Ames, the director, saying, "You are no longer invited to see this piece." My counsel, primarily in the form of a elder, Doreen Jensen, has said this piece is utterly, utterly inappropriate. So that became that instigated a long writing correspondence between Michael Ames and I. I was at first just outraged. What do you mean? I mean, what do you mean? And Miquel, in her research, has uncovered those letters, which is kind of amazing. And finally, I began to understand what he was saying. He introduced me to Doreen Jensen, who pulled me further into an understanding that before that time I hadn't held. This is 1986, remember? And as the conversation went on between Doreen and Michael Ames and I, it took 3 years for us to develop the notion of how we could collaborate in a way that was not inappropriate, i.e. appropriation. And from Doreen's point of view, it meant a collaboration with living practitioners. It meant some kind of process. And she introduced me to Margaret's father, Ken Harris, Chief Hagbwagwath, who the pronunciation is a little beyond me. I was very sympathetic to that notion of how difficult it is for the palate to wrap itself around some of these words and some of these names. The process, somehow this seems a little oddly placed, but that's right. Maybe it's because it's sort of between me and you, in a way. With Gayani began a long, long process of tutelage. So Gayani was in its duration 7 years from the very beginning. Gayani was, in my understanding, is a name, an esteemed name held by a house, the House of Gnu, and it's also a process, a ceremony of bringing together oppositional sides in a designated neutral territory to resolve conflict. And it's also a knock-knock, which brings us into a whole new area. It was Michael Ames and Doreen Jensen and I who brought brought the work to the point where I could begin rehearsal with the Harris family, and that included Margaret Harris, who was then 17. And the Harris family and my group of dancers, the Karen Jamieson Dance Company, at that point included a number of artists who were First Nations but not coastal, not Gitxsan. And we began this process again. And sometimes I've described that my thinking at that time, I could see Western dance and Gitxsan dance and couldn't hold them in my mind at the same time. And in order to do so, the long process of collaboration, the tutelage with Michael Ames, with Doreen Jensen, and also Evan Adams, was like trying to creak open the boundaries of the mind to the point where I could bring these divergent understandings of dance, the function of dance, the place of dance, into something whole, and we could begin to create. There's so much more to say about that creative process, but I think one of the things I wanted to bring up and why I went all the way back to Rainforest was that had I not blundered in without knowledge and without understanding, I would not have met Michael Ames, I would not have met Doreen Jensen, I would not have met Ken Harris, I would not have met Margaret. Gayani would not only have happened, but not only that, but there were some young First Nations artists who were not Gitxsan, who were inspired by the piece, one of them being Byron Chief Moon, and we had a 17-year collaboration that came out of Rainforest. So there's a paradox there that I wanted to bring up, because Miquel and I talked about that. When transgression or breaking boundaries leads you to open up a whole path that you end up following, as I have followed now for 27 years, which is going deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding. So there's the paradox. And when people come to me sometimes and say, how do I start? And I'm afraid to start, I have to say, just start. But more than anything, it's time. Time. And Margaret and I have talked about how only time builds trust. Only time can change your mind. If you think about how difficult it is, and in some of our collaborations, we learn to sing Gitxsan songs, and the extraordinary difficulty of wrapping the palate around those words and actually singing them. It's like that with the mind. The mind does not change like that. The mind has to creak open to be able to incorporate concepts, ideas, philosophies, feelings. Just as the Gitxsan language had words that there were no translations for, there are concepts within the Gitxsan worldview which are not held in the European worldview, and that I can only say that creaking, opening, time, and sometimes pain, because it also includes a sense that the ground isn't firm underneath you anymore. I'm going to give Margaret. I'm going to hand this over to Margaret now.
I think also it would be all right to let some of the pictures go. They're not in timed with anything that's being said, but
I thought they were going. Too bad.
Simgiget sigam hana daflansam simgiget ni itun gilda dawit sim wilps lelt toyaxi hath gedal hieptun masquium squamish slewatooth windni a nocti num lu amgodi windy hoxley spagaitisum lu amgodi. My heart is happy to be amongst all of you here today. And like Karen, I'd like to share a little bit of background that led up to the collaboration of Gawagani. I think even going back and looking at Aradauk, which is the practices of songs, dances, oral narratives that go back to the beginning, for my family, to the beginning of Damelahamid, there were significant transformational events that took place within our histories, and they were marked by these artistic practices. And so there's many, many layers that come in terms of course, protocol, and of course, process. And of course, something very significant happened for us throughout the potlatch ban, in which these practices were carried forward in a different way within my family. They were carried forward by my grandmother, Irene Harris. And it wasn't until the 1950s and 60s in which my family decided that we would once again carry this practice in a public way through performance, which is significantly different than being practiced within our feast halls. And this is something that went for 2 decades prior to the collaboration that happened with Karen. Now, as a young person at that time, I didn't think too much about the conversation that took place between Karen and my father, who held the hereditary title of Samagad Hathwagwath, and who had the cultural authority over the songs and dances at that time. Just as I didn't really think too much about what went through my grandmother's mind in the 1960s when they decided to share our family's adawk through performance. However, being a young dancer, to have experienced collaborating with Karen's company, I saw that put my family on a new trajectory. I saw that there was something that transformed within us, and I know that I owe a lot to that collaboration for what is now the Dancers of Damelahamid and the work that I continue to do. At this time, I no longer represent the House of Hathwagwath. I no longer share those same songs and dances, but the story that took place through that collaboration and that continued within our family was something that created a really, really strong foundation for me to know how to move into what would come next. And I think what Karen mentioned by talking about the amount of time needed to put into something, what I'm describing is a time period, really thousands of years, that goes back through these practices that have led me to where I am here today. And I always feel very accompanied by that, not so much as an individual, but simply accompanied by that practice and how it has transformed throughout time. And I think what comes down to the essence of it is where the intention is. I was told that if you could imagine yourself stepping into the feast hall, into Samagat Damlahad's feast hall in heaven, you would be asked first, do you come with a clean heart, clean mind, and clean intention? And if so, then you can step across that threshold. And I believe that it is from that place that we have entered into collaboration, and that has what makes it possible for us to take the time and possible for us to also have the humility for it. And so in the work that we have undertaken currently, Karen and I, which we've named Broken, for myself, I think the most significant part of the concept that's come behind this work was this idea that there's an exterior of ourselves that needs to be broken through in order to let through the inner sight. And it's that outer blindness that we have to break through in order to be able to see with our inner selves. And I'll let Karen say a few more things before we finish.
Broken is not what we set out to, was not the piece we started to make. As we began working together a few years ago, we had a number of questions and interests. Again, Margaret and I have worked much like Gawagani, starting quite frankly and humbly from our respective places in the cultural, across this cultural abyss, knowing it's not a matter, you can't just slam them together. And the dialogue began through movement. And I think fundamentally, the word trust comes up a lot. I trust dance. I trust the language of the body. I trust what dance can lead us to, which is an integrated body-mind, and believe, as Margaret mentioned, that through this process of dancing questions, dancing responses, dancing to each other, receiving from each other information from the dancing, thinking body, we can go to depth that is not possible simply through words or through reading. And this has been, I think, from the outset, my approach to Gawagani, that the dancing body is deeply connected to land, to the ground under our feet, and that this has been our way of communicating. What's come up is really fascinating connections. When I turn to look at Margaret to talk to her, I can't talk to you anymore, so I'll just beam it that way. It's hard to think of our dialogue separate. For instance, spiral has become something that both of us have been fascinated by. I'm fascinated because the universe is full of spirals. Our blood spirals through the veins. The water works in spiral. Got to finish this thought, Marie. Then I find out that in ancient Celtic mythology, and that's my ancestral background is Celtic, the spiral is a symbol for connecting the inside and the outside consciousness. And Margaret and I have been working with inside-outside almost from the beginning. And this notion of paradox has come back again with broken, because we began with broken-hearted, broken spirit, broken communication, broken lines of connection to the past and to the future, and something of the despair and deep sorrow of broken. Then we discovered in some writings that had been given me by an anthropologist called Marjorie Halpin that there was a mask collected by Marius Barbeau, the anthropologist, and way back when, 18-something, and it was called Broken by the Sun, and it was collected, this is what's even more interesting, at Kitwanga, and Kitwanga is the place, the village where Margaret's people are from. It's a Giksan village, and that Broken by the Sun was a transformation mask that, as Margaret says, from the blinding ignorance broken through to inner truth, which I think is what our dialogue is uncovering. That transformation is at the center. Is that it? Is that all we got?
I know that it feels that we're very short for time, but a lot of what I think you're wanting to share will come up in the Q&A afterwards as well. Thank you so much for your words and your work, Gilda Dawit and Karen. Margaret and I also have a very long history since her family came to my community in the early 80s, or actually about the late 70s, early 80s. So I've literally grew up singing the songs and dances that her family gave to us and have known them essentially my whole life. And so I wrote the first chapter of my dissertation on Galgani, and it continues. It set up such a complex understanding of the way in which our people work through protocol in relation to not only the performance and the collaboration, but also Hathwagwath, Ken Harris, and Hathye, Doreen Jensen. They were also activists. They were political activists and a part of the Delgamuth case, and that also helped to they took that into account as they were deciding the protocol necessary for the collaboration. So it's an incredibly rich history that is continuing from Galgani, that very first collaboration, now to this piece, Broken. And our next speakers are Savannah. So Renae, Morriseau, and Savannah are going to talk about their, Savannah Walling will talk about their collaborative work.
Okay. Whew. My name is Renae Morriseau, and my Indian name is Piasis, and Cree, that means little bird. I know, I'm not a little bird anymore. But as Aaron was saying, I'd just like to share a song just in regards to the collaboration here. English song. Looking out over the water, searching for the greed. Is it any wonder who could satisfy his greed? But I would not spend one day in heaven if I knew that I could not find you there. You were the zephyr of my vision and the eye of a hurricane in prayer. All you need is your life, and you knew it all the time. Oh, hey, all you need is your life. As you put your hand in mine, ooh, as you put your hand in mine. Oh. Thank you. I am Korean Soto. My father's side is from the Peguis Reserve. On my mother's side, they're from Dog Creek. On my mother's side, they were enfranchised because my grandfather went to World War I. On my father's side, we were forced to leave our community, which was St. Peter's, just outside of Selkirk, Manitoba, in 1907. And my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, my mother, stayed in the area of St. Peter's, in which they are, on my father's side, my relatives are buried there. I've always been an urban Indian, but I remember practicing the pipe ceremonies. Now, all I remember as a child was that when we would have gatherings, that there'd be this food in the kitchen. And I remember I was small because the table was right there. And I remember looking into the living room, you know, when they were talking, and there was only a choice. I had to either sit in that room and be quiet, or go outside of my grandmother's house, or go outside and play in the park. Well, I did that. And I came back, and I remember just looking into the room where there was this work was happening, and lifting up these paper bags with this food under it, and sticking my fingers, you know, looking at the food. And my mother, when I was 12 years old, she had gotten cancer, and I couldn't understand why she left me for 2 weeks. And my grandmother was telling me, well, she went to go get doctored. And I went, what do you mean by that, getting doctored? And she had cancer. And she went to Saskatchewan, and a friend of mine, Curtis Ahaniku, his grandfather was a reverend. He was an Anglican minister, but he was also a medicine man. And my mother spent 2 weeks with him. When she came back with bear medicine, I began to, at that time, understand what it meant by our clan systems, and what it meant by the people that embody those lived memories that come to you, whether it's in your dreams or when you're walking down the street and the plant speaks to you, you know? Or when you're down in the downtown east side and you meet someone that's on the street that wants to talk. And he's in there for a reason. He's there because of whatever. But there was always something that I loved about working with the Vancouver Moving Theatre for the years that I have, was that there was an understanding that the lived memory of the downtown east side was something that Vancouver Moving Theatre has always listened to. As a board member of the Vancouver Moving Theatre for the last 12 years, so 10 years?
At least.
Yeah, 12 years. Has always been a dialogue of sharing and listening, and being able to sort of articulate and digest the energies of what makes the downtown east side so vital and so much a part of what we call, you know, this land, this Coast Salish territory. And the fact that as an artist, and I have always been an artist, growing up with the music that was around my kitchen table with my uncles and my aunties, and with the ceremonies that I grew up with, that was never really explained to me whether what the Sundance was or what, but I had certain things that I had to do, certain things that I had to wear, certain ways that I had to sit in the sweat lodge. These were things that I've always questioned, and I always, you know, and I was always told by my elders, oh, you know, just listen. Like, you don't, you know, like, shut up, Renae, because, you know, you just need to listen without, you know. And I think through all of those things, and now, you know, making my home here on Coast Salish territory, and listening to what those stories are to the people that live in the downtown east side. And yes, there are First Nations people down there. There are Ukrainian people down there. There are Asian, Chinese, and Japanese people down there that have the same history with the government, within legislations and policies that try to determine who we are as a people. For my people, the stories of some of the, you know, that are panhandling down there, you know, just listen to where they come from. Because of residential school, because of dislocation to land, because of the economics taken away from us, our lived memory of on the waters, you know, these stories that I've heard, that the role of Aboriginal women being undermined by the paternalistic policies of the federal and provincial municipalities too, you know, that we had to contend with in finding and maintaining our connection to these things that have been taken from us. So in the projects that the Vancouver Moving Theatre and that we've done in our collaborations has been about those things, right?
Very much so.
Okay, you go ahead.
Okay. My name is Savannah Walling, and I'm carrying my great-grandmother's name, and that is a Taino word from the language that was spoken in the Caribbean when Columbus came. And I was born in Oklahoma in the Fox Sac territory, and I'm a first-generation immigrant to Canada, arriving with the Vietnam War. And I'm a 12th generation descendant of Huguenot refugees landing in Manhattan. And I'm also, my family's tangled bloodlines go farther than I have concrete knowledge of. And I've been living in the downtown east side for over 40 years, I think. It's been hugely formative. And right now I'm sitting in the midst of a network of relationships with Karen James. My training is as a dancer, and on my right is Karen Jamieson, with whom Terry and I danced for 7 years, and our pathways have been intertwining ever since. And on my left is Sharon Callis, with whom we've just shared a project together, the Big House that many of you saw. and then the years of working with and being guided by Renae. I'm going to just speak briefly about the project that we just did. In the big house, we finished planting the big house seed yesterday with 3 cultural sharing feasts. And these feasts were created by, for, and with about the 3 founding Coast Salish peoples, communities of the downtown east side, and also of immigrant settler communities that have come into the downtown east side. And they were the 6th in a series of feasts that were produced in partnership since 2010 with downtown east side partners, contributing in a variety of ways: a park, native housing society, neighborhood house, a classical garden, community cultural centers, a drug users resource center. And they were also, it emerged out of a series of relationships that have been forming over the last decade and more since working on the downtown east side community play and beyond. And this feast was created with the participation of Renae since about 2002, and over the last year with her really valued guidance as a dramaturge and a consultant on that journey of bringing it forward. At every step of the way, the purpose and process and impact of it, they've emerged rather than being predetermined, and I'm still trying to understand what we've done. And it's happened. And each reiteration of it happened in response to existing relationships or an invitation to bring something of this big house to this new community. And every step we've been weaving our way into new territory and moving out of comfort zones. It's really been scary a lot of time. And moving away from kind of standard working practices and values of the theater world or performing arts world. And we came to create it partly as a result of these relationships that have been forming and projects that have been happening over the last many years. Also because I've had a real interest in exploring what Floyd Favell, a playwright, has spoken of, about how for there to be an Indigenous Canadian theater, the theater would have to be influenced and changed by the cultures and techniques that existed in this country before colonialism relegated, as he says, our cultures to the folklore of the past, and that this is what needs to be done in Canada. The theater needs to be influenced and changed by the land in which it resides. And this is what I do believe about the arts. And then another part of this journey was that when the train of thought began being envisioned a number of years ago, and Ruth and my conversations, and began thinking, what could we contribute in Vancouver to help launch the train of thought in a good way? And so the big house and the symposium were part of that dream of what could be contributed. And I would just say that it's been guided a lot by that theme that we live on shared territories. And so yesterday's feast in particular was an acknowledgement of that, and also an acknowledging of this community of artists that have come all the way from across Canada. And in creating it, we've been working together to gather strength through sharing lived experiences from this community, through sharing cultural protocols of cultures within this community, and of sharing existing and new poetry and music and choreography, also with languages spoken by the Indigenous and immigrant communities, and working with oral history involving that has been woven from cultural practices. Weaving all this together to create art that speaks to our situation in this time and this place. And I've been hugely, and the whole team has been hugely guided by the artists that have come together, by Renae's insights and what she has to share, and also by the presenters with each is involved a navigation to find out what needs to be spoken, and to give, and to with the trust that they're going to speak from their hearts about what needs to be said for that situation and time. So I'll just, that about over 100 people from Ukrainian, Coast Salish, urban Aboriginal, Chinese, Filipino, other cultural groups were involved in these feasts that took place over the last 3 days. And we do believe that our communities have stories to share in the language of art about what is happening in Canada and about who we are. And that we believe that we gain strength from reclaiming traditional practices, teachings that are embedded in hospitality and story and art and song and dance, and that our strength comes too from passing these on to future generations and to sharing and witnessing with those who live among us. And we also believe that new stories are emerging for our situation and time that are formed by culture and protocols and techniques that have existed on this continent for thousands of years, and those that have been brought from the four corners of the globe. And so I'm going to pass back on to Renae, who can also reflect upon that this journey of creating the big house has been hugely influenced by creating a Storyweaving, another project that has been part of it, by the birth coming out of the community play.
We've done a lot of stuff together.
Thank you.
We don't really know what we want to talk about. Yeah. But we'll talk a little bit about Storyweaving. Storyweaving was I'll go really as fast as I can. Storyweaving was about a 2-year process where we went into the downtown east side and we collected stories, Savannah, Rosemary Georgeson, myself, and we had like a pile of material that was either recorded and or written out for me to look at. Out of all of those readings, the idea was the story was about what we had just mentioned about residential school, about finding a sister that had gotten lost, and the gambling of your own healing, you know, that journey between the victim to the survivor, to the one that comes from a survivor to what some of the writings are, there's a thriver. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there's we utilize the bone game, which is slahal, as a mechanism to talk about that gamble. And it was an opportunity for elders. Woody Morrison was a Haida elder. He participated. It was his first time, and he was so excited about that. Marge Cantron White, who had went to residential school, and she talked about that, and several other people that were involved in that piece. Vancouver Moving Theatre has always consistently listened to the community, and I'm sure we'll work together again.
I just want to thank you for your presentation, and also want to thank Vancouver Moving Theatre and Renae for their important work. I really love that you said that Vancouver Moving Theatre has this history of listening to the lived memories of the downtown east side, and really listening and bringing them to life in all of these really important ways. And our dance group, you probably saw in some of the photos, we had the honor of participating in Storyweaving. And my family has gone to the Big House production twice. We went to the one in the Chinese Garden, and that was years ago. And just seeing where it is now and its growth and its strength, it was strong then, but it just absolutely blew me away a couple days ago. It was such an honor to be a witness. And as a guest in these territories, both of those productions have really taught me a lot about the history here. Because I having been raised in our people's oral history and lived learning our people's history through the experiences of my family, and that's what resonates with me. And so learning through people's lived experiences that have been passed down through generations has just really help me to be better in relation to our non-Indigenous people that are here, to our settlers that are here, to the global community that lives here in Vancouver. And I just wanted to thank both of you, all three of you, Terry, Savannah, Renae. Thank you very much for that. And our next speakers, who are going to share with you this, I'm very excited about all of the, what has been shared today, but these two I actually don't know anything about other than what I've read, but I'm an art historian. That's what my PhD is, in art history. So I just, being that I'm Indigenous, I can't separate the performing arts from the visual arts that's just not our way of being. And I'm very excited to hear how the collaborative processes happens in the process of weaving.
And we're standing because it's a good opportunity for us to stretch. And I think better on my feet. I'm going to let Tracy introduce herself first.
No chayap men wahat siamen siayer hat and swalwen tits sisemia queen sna tna chant la chechowich ochomeoch anwanaxton squalwen. Just like to thank each and every one of you for being here today to join in this conversation. My ancestral name is Sisemia, and I come from the village of Chechelwick. I have a good feeling in my heart, and I'm honored to be here with all of you today. Hoi chika.
My name is Sharon Callis. My birth name was Davies, and I am about 7 generations Canadian. I think of myself as being a Canadian mutt because I am not enough of anything to say that I'm Welsh Canadian or Scottish Canadian or German Canadian. What I can say is that my family has been rootless and transient for over 200, about 50 years, coming from New Brunswick to Quebec to Ontario to Alberta to BC to Saskatchewan, back to Ontario, and myself now having been here in Coast Salish territory for about 24 years. And it's been very important for me that I put down roots here and that I connect. My family is also, on my mother's side, farmers, on my father's side, philosophers and academics, and I realize now in my mid-40s that I am somehow placing myself right between those two lines of bringing together philosophy and not so much the academia, but certainly the farming and how I'm connecting and participating, I think, in re-healing the land in some way and regaining our connection. I am going to go very quickly because our time is so tight. I am going to sort of rapid fire through this project that Tracy and I have just begun on. And I'm so humbled and honored that we're included in this panel and the people that are presenting at the symposium over the next couple of days that have a really rich history of working together. Tracy and I have just begun this project in the last year, and actually what we're talking about is not yet complete. So urban cloth is been about looking at bringing people together to discover fibers. Terroir is a word that is actually a borrowed French word, and it refers to the sense of place. Specifically, it's used in wine tasting and how you can taste the soil, the geography, the wind, all of that influences the product of what you're consuming. And we're so separated from our clothing, but when you think about cloth and what fibers feel like, Tracy and I have realized that there is actually this connection of what a cloth feels like based on where it's grown. And I learned that my first year of growing flax for linen. So this project is specifically about what are the cloth fibers around us, the native species, the introduced species, as well as the agricultural crops that we can grow. Working with us on this has been Mireille Rosner, who's been looking at the movement of our labor and how that can be choreographed with community dancers into creating something that really invests acknowledgement and awareness of our physicality as we do what is essentially really hard labor. So Tracy and I, coming from very different perspectives and where our work has come from, have been able to fill in some gaps for each other. We both come from a place, as we all do, of being really disconnected from the land. There's been, for multiple reasons, knowledge lost in how to process plants, what plants can do, even harvest times. Coming together, we've had an opportunity to share and build that knowledge back together, recognizing there's a lot of crossover in the different ways that we've been working and learning. So in the summer of 2014, we spent harvesting and tending crops at a place called Means of Production Garden. It's in the Mount Pleasant community. And Means of Production grows specifically artist crops. So we had the opportunity to grow flax there as a linen processed, crop to be processed into linen, as well as to do a lot of harvesting through a native shrub and tree section that's growing on site. There were informal work sessions that essentially became social circles. They were opportunities for people to come learn about the fibers alongside us in a very informal way, but also became very much about story sharing. All of this work and finding ways for creating celebration became very important. Finding the crossover between dance and music, different ways of using our bodies, finding rhythm, work songs, all of this became very apparent as we moved through the work. Harvesting and celebration events allowed for key seasonal points to become a focus for sharing what we were doing. Something that's been talked about a lot here is the idea of timelines and how we all deal with timelines and different perspectives on timelines. A timeline that Tracy and I are dealing with constantly is the timeline that's coming from the land itself. We can't dictate a timeline. We simply have to go with the timeline that nature is imposing upon us. And so that is immediately a very humbling experience and something that keeps us on track because there is a particular time of how things can happen. And if you miss that opportunity, you have to wait a year. I've lost my point. So harvesting flax for linen, we had crops that were growing. There were basically two different sites that we were looking at specifically. One was in Mount Pleasant at the Means of Production Garden. Another was a place called Trillium North Park, a new park that's in Strathcona, basically runs along the backside of Strathcona Community Gardens, Melkin Ave. So we had some wild foraging that we were doing. But the music and dance and linking back into those agricultural rhythms and seed saving and community fiber processing became really key to what we were doing. We began some fiber blending workshops where we were looking at how we could take the fibers that we were harvesting and processing and make simple drop spindles, as would have been made thousands of years ago using just simple rocks and sticks. And then we set out making a set of teaching spindles. By late summer and into winter, we held spinning sessions in local parks, outside the work studio, and in places like the downtown Eastside Women's Center or Oppenheimer Park Ladies' Tea Group, and at Enterprising Women Making Art. We brought a beat to the spinning wheels, realizing that a foot treadle keeps a rhythm. Martin, who's one of our community participants, rigged up 2 spinning wheels to strike drums when we spin. That came about from working in a studio with music playing and realizing that my foot was hitting the treadle at the same beat as the music. And that brought back into play this concept of how spinning would be connected to work songs and the rhythm to everything we were doing in the work. The time spent particularly at the downtown Eastside Women's Center, where there's a high percentage of urban Aboriginal women, we found so many wanting to share stories of their own childhoods on the land, memories of what grandparents did. Most for the spinning and weaving workshops were way more about the stories being shared and time spent together learning, and not about production or a lot of fiber being processed. Some women kept small samples of what they had made as a memento, and others left the bit they had spun for use in a larger project. We've had a community doing fiber-based work in the Strathcona and downtown East Side for about 4 years now, and there are key people with great skills in the community that come out and work with us, and they've become a part of the core research and project development brainstorming team. So we've had multiple sessions happening out of McLean Park, which is one of the Park Board Fieldhouse residencies. That's been just an incredible opportunity to bring people together on a regular, scheduled and unscheduled and informal way to have this work kind of really literally take roots in the community. At one of these sessions, Tracy wanted to start a pair of shoes when she saw a shoe lass that I had in the studio. We took off on a shoe theme. It was a perfect metaphor for our feet and how they stand on the land, and a good connection for Miquel and the dancers to begin work with. One of the great parts of this project is giving ourselves time together. Tracy and I have struggled to find time, and that's probably been our largest problem in this project, is just the amount of scheduling complexity with our multiple, very complex lives to try and find that crossover. But I have gotten to spend time in Tracy's world on the mountain, participating in a cedar bark harvest last year for the very first time, which was an incredible moving experience. Tracy has had time to spend in a domesticated garden with me, something that was a new world for her, learning about other plants, but also discovering some of the native shrubs we have growing in the garden that are plants she hadn't worked with before. One of the things that came up for me in our work together in harvesting, which was kind of the moment of tension, a learning opportunity, was when we went to forage for Himalayan blackberry, one of our invasives, and we went to harvest the fiber. And I am just in there with my garden shears, the secateurs, and I'm just hacking away because, I'm gathering, and I'm just going to, gather as much as I can. And I turn around, and Tracy is pulling out her tobacco pouch and is beginning to do a ceremony of asking the plant for permission. And I had this moment of, oh shit, what have I done? And it was this realization of two different worlds that we have come from. Tracy, who comes from a place of having respect for the plants and asking the plants permission and developing that relationship with the plants beforehand. And I come from a world of gardeners and working with ecologists where we're going in and we're ripping out invasives and we're getting rid of weeds and we're not being respectful to the plant at all. So for me, that was a real sort of dawning moment of, okay, how do I bridge this? I don't see myself getting to a point where I'm going to carry a pack of tobacco, that is going to feel something that I can take on. It doesn't feel true to me, to my culture, and it doesn't feel like it's something that's a fit. But the idea of an offering or a gift does make sense. And throughout the project, one of the points when the spinning wheels were out, and Tracy was on a drum, and I was on the spinning wheel, and we were talking about a song and a work song, and this idea of being able to commission a song came to be. And the concept that was something that was possible, that the organization that I had formed a nonprofit to carry on this work could actually commission a song and what that song would mean and how we could use it and how that could become a song that we use to teach people about reconnecting to the plants and asking the plants permission and thanking them for the knowledge that they were going to share with us. This became an opportunity where we could kind of bridge those ways and also bring a work song in, have an offering back to the plants, and reconnect us to the land. So we've just learned that song, and we've done a recording of it. I have, and I don't know if it worked or not, embedded in that video in the middle, there's like a little sound icon, if the tech can try, just like 10 seconds of it. This was us learning the song. I'm not sure if it'll work or not. Oh, maybe not. So it's back one slide. Yeah, right in the middle. There you go. Will that do anything for you? Nope? Okay. There we go. Maybe not. Okay, that's all right. You'll just have to wait. We'll leave that as a dangling carrot. Okay, so you'll move on to the next. So the song opens up this new opportunity that I think really will be the second part of the project. So at this point, we are onto the shoes. And I'm going to turn over, because we've gotten the 2 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I just wanted to share a few things about this project because some of the things that I've learned may have been a little bit different than Sharon's brought up. One of the things that you'll know about me really quickly is that I have 4 children. So I constantly have kids hanging off my legs, they're on my back, I'm holding hands, but that's just part of my life and part of what we've integrated into the process so that our children will know and understand and have a way of connecting to the land as well as a natural piece. So instead of having to learn later in life, that this will be a part of the process. I learned that hornets and wasps are first cousins from the means of production garden after I stuck my hand in the middle of a hornet's nest and got stung. To the horrible realization, I'm like, how am I going to be a weaver, a person who works with plants and fibers, and be severely allergic to bees? When I went to, I decided after a certain point in time, I better go to the hospital and get this checked out because I didn't really want to stab myself with an EpiPen if I didn't need to. And I had to talk to the nurse and say, I'm sorry, I know this is my 3rd time here this week, and I'm not stalking you, but I just need to know, do I have to get that pen or what? And he's like, yeah, they're first cousins, but I think you're okay. And I was like, okay. Some of the other things that I learned along the way were also having an opportunity to sit at the feet of Karen Barnaby, who's an amazing spinner. And we sat there at Trillium, and I was kind of shoving her dog over a little bit because he wanted to be right beside her, but so did I. So I could, we're fighting for space, but I wanted to watch her hands, and I was watching her movement and watching the fluidity and just the beauty of how all of these different types of fibers can come together to become one amazing piece. The other thing that we learned in terms of like working between two worlds, between the world of a garden and an urban environment and between a wilderness place, has been a bit of a complicated piece. And I say that because there's a part of my heart that really wants to cry. And I mean that with every sense of me. Even the walk from, I parked blocks away to walk here, and I was like, wow, every tree is fabricated, every tree is cut and groomed, and every flower is planted, but there's no wilderness space here. You know, I mean, I don't know if anybody else notices, but other than a couple dogs, there's no bears, there's no cougars, there's no, you know, we've eliminated animals from this city. And to be quite honest, they've been eliminated from the majority of our traditional territory. And this is a devastating realization. I was studying my Master's of Education, and I drove home from UBC, and I was looking around, and I could count the trees on my hands. I counted the number of trees as I was driving home between UBC and North Vancouver. And I was like, I found myself really angry, and I was like, how many damn stores do we need? How many shopping malls do we need? How many like cars do we need? It was never this way. And I think these trees, and I look at them and I think, thank you, because I'm not even sure that you can hold all the strength that it must take for you to keep the people well. And I think that's part of it. We went to the mountains together as one of our experiences. And Sharon's husband is a horn maker. Am I saying that correct? Okay, so he makes amazing horns from wood, and he was teaching me how to see horn trees that would grow on the side of the mountain and how the trees would kind of grow down and then up. So he brought some horns out, and we went with our families, and we stood out there, and I was laughing because he's standing out there and he's playing these beautiful horns way up high in the Ilaho, and you could see a time and a place that looked like there was no settlement, there was no buildings, there was no paved roads, there was nothing like that. And he's playing this beautiful music, and my husband looks at me, and he's like looking around, and I'm like looking at him like, what's the matter? And he's like, I'm just trying to be careful. He's gonna call in all the bears. Because of the sound and the curiosity that comes with that. So these are just a few examples of some of the stories of, you know, having our worlds come together. What a real pleasure and honor it's been to spend time with Sharon, because her deep knowledge and understanding of plants has also impacted my practice, and I think it will have an impact on our community in the future as well. So thank you so much for your time. Hoi chika.
So I'm frantically taking notes over here because I absolutely love your project. It's so beautiful, and it's and you know, we talk a lot in institutionally, academically about indigenizing this and indigenizing that, and part of that work is decolonizing. You can't really indigenize a practice without decolonizing it. And as I said right before I stepped aside for your presentation, you know, from my approach as an Indigenous art historian is not to separate the performing arts from the visual arts. What I love about your project is that it does just that, as well as land-based practices. It brings it all together in music, the composition, and Becky, her last name is Duncan now, she's recently.
Yeah, sorry, there's confusion. That was her sort of childhood name as I was introduced to her by Tracy, but Rebecca Duncan is her professional name, so hence the
Rebecca.
Come on.
And she's so I know I've gone through a name change myself, so I know that happens, right? But that you commissioned that new song, and I'm guessed in the process of creating a dance.
Yes, work is actually beginning tomorrow night. There's going to be the first group. So we've just finished making shoes with the dancers from the fibers that we've harvested from the land. And we've just recorded the song, and Mireille and I have had an opportunity with my husband David to sing the song and learn it with Rebecca when Tracy was out of town. So we're going to be bringing Tracy up to speed on that and seeing how we can kind of bring all of these pieces together, but even how the protocol around how that song is introduced, how it's named, how the intention is placed upon the song, all of that is kind of a learning that's ahead of us in our journey. Yeah.
I was teasing you, by the way, when I said, "Oh, it doesn't work. I guess you're going to have to sing it." That means I like you.
You notice I didn't take you up on that. I didn't just break into chant.
So one point I want to reiterate before I open up the entire panel for discussion is that moment of tension that you talked about as Tracy was going through the protocol that we use to show respect to anything that any way that we engage with the land, that our plant relatives, along with all of our relatives, that we take their lives in any form for either our nutrition or our clothing, in all the different ways that we listen to the timelines of our environment, which I also loved about your work, to be respectfully, to keep those relationships good. And what I really thought was powerful about that moment of tension and that realization of the different places that you're coming from is that you didn't appropriate what Tracy was doing. You were honest with yourself and say, well, I don't feel comfortable with then wearing a tobacco pouch and giving tobacco. And we're not tobacco people, and I've gone through that myself. We give offerings, but they're not tobacco offerings. But to compose a new song out of that, and that's something that I've written about quite extensively, that through those moments of tension, process of refinement of protocols as well, new doors are open to possibilities of creating new work, of new approaches and new ways of being. And forever now, because our songs go on forever and ever, much longer than any of us live, now there's a song. That song that I'm sure will be a part of your family, and all of your beautiful little ones will sing and learn that song and remember that moment. So it's just really important work that you two are doing.
Something that came up at the big house, I think it was Saturday night that it was first said, and I heard it afresh when Cody reiterated it yesterday, and that was that memory is the mother of community. And that really resonated for me, that idea that we're here, we've come together, and we're collectively building new memories, and that is our community moving forward. And that feels so important to be mindful of and not forget. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, all of the presenters are doing amazing, amazing work. Can we give them a big round of applause? I'd like to open up the floor for any questions. I'm not sure, do we have a microphone somewhere? Okay. So we'll get to you way back there after the question here.
Get out of the way.
Dale Hamilton, Everybody's Theatre Company from Eden Mills, population 300 in southwestern Ontario. I'd like to build on something Renae said, and I think in the last panel as well, about politics taking time to catch up to the arts, something like that. Arts? Yes. So I think Rosalind had said it in the previous as well, and perhaps you reiterated it. I'd like to make the case that I think it's possible to take the arts into politics and not necessarily see them as separate, and not see politics as something dirty that we wouldn't want to enter into. In 2 sentences, in my home community where my family's lived for 6 generations as a settler family, my family's ancestral land was threatened by a suburban housing development. We're in the shadow of Mississauga and of Toronto. And so we were able to use theatre as a tool to engage people and trying to stop that. But we did, 5 of us who were in the community engaged play had to make the leap and become politicians. So we became municipal politicians, and we were able to turn the tide. And theatre was used even at the Ontario Municipal Board in a legal process. So I wondered, Renae, if you would like to speak more to that point.
My work in doing community theatre began with a woman named Margot Charlatan. She was in Winnipeg, and I was working as a social worker at Mama Wichita in Winnipeg at the time. We were developing a strategy to talk about Aboriginal curriculum in the school, and maybe Columbo can tell me the name. You know, the Children of the Earth. Yeah, that was in the North End. So before that school formed, we brought in Margot Kane. We brought her in to sort of begin this dialogue of what the policies are, and to bring in the policymakers and the youth and the teachers, and to talk about these theater exercises that was based on Augusta Boel's work. So, and then they created plays, and we created little pieces of plays about prioritizing the issues of education with the words from youth, from the teachers, and from the city of Winnipeg people to sort of kind of merge. So through the work of using forum theater and guerrilla theater, that we were able to get those words from the people that would never really speak at such an event. And it was only because we used art in that way, because it was not a happy place at the time. And it worked. We have a school now in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Could I just add to that? We have amongst us a champion for why Vancouver is in the position that it's in now, and that's Jill Weaving. So I would like to just... Jill is an artist herself, and she decided, I'm going to say 20-odd years ago, that she would work and be an artist from the inside, and so she joined the Park Board, and the programs that we have in place that so many artists in this room have had the opportunity to do what they do with community, have support, have place, have recognition and acknowledgement, is because of the work that Jill has done for all of us. So thank you, Jill.
Just before we go on to the next question, I think too it's important to bring to your attention that actually most dance group leaders are also either hereditary chiefs or elected chiefs. So I'm thinking of Bill Williams and Ian Campbell, and that those I wouldn't say boundaries, they're not boundaries at all, but there's a fluidity that goes back and forth and in between, and they're constantly fueling one another. So any sort of binaries or compartmentalizations that you may have seen, I think they're falsely imposed upon us, as though arts doesn't matter, and we all fight that. But politically, we know that arts does the work faster, and as Rosalind said, we're way beyond. The government is working to catch up with us. So in the back, way back there, last row.
I was just going off of that question. Well, really, I kept watching your hands, like everybody on the whole panel. And you're all movers and shakers and doers, and you have very interesting hand gestures. And I was thinking of that comment you said about, I just really wanted to watch your hands, when you were talking about sitting with a weaver or a spinner, and how do you actually get those kind of alternate approaches to experience and engagement, like using these multi-sensory approaches. Do you have any insight into the challenges or kind of all your approaches to creating alternative experience? Like, how do we share, especially on a large scale, those things that are kind of only tangible by feel or combo sense? Any experiences you've had with trying to share that beyond a place where you could actually feel? Yeah, that's a vague question, but go ahead.
It's such a complex question, but it is, but it isn't. I've been working with mountain goat wool for several years now, and would be what I would call in training. I've tried to learn from lots of different sources, and I've really tried to be meticulously slow about how I learn, so I don't rush the process. Because I figure if I try to hurry, and rush, then I'm going to miss the teachings that go along the way. And when I was referring to the spinning, I had my husband brought home our first mountain goat quite a few years ago. He was the first man in our village to do this for a very long time. And when the goat came home, we worked together as a family, and it sounds funny, but it was like a visitor, a guest coming back to our community again, and we cleaned our house and got everything like ready, just so we went to go and talk to some of our elders. We asked my husband's grandma to come to our house to say a prayer. We shared the meat in our community to ensure that we were there to feed the people, and asked the Huixalcan to teach me. I didn't have anybody physically there to say, here we go, here's what you do. And I wanted that, but it wasn't there. And it took me a while to realize that what I needed to do was to actually ask the mountain goat, ask the ancestors, ask Chachayanak, the creator, to teach me and to show me. So over a period of a number of years now, I learned how to remove the hair from the hide, how to clean it, how to beat it with a stick, how to gather the other fibers, again, on a seasonal basis, because it really wasn't about me and my time. It was actually more about the time of when things became ready. And so some pieces were ready, in the spring, some pieces were ready in the summer, some things were ready in the fall. Like stinging nettle, I had to wait until the fall, till a certain point in time. And I was trying to talk to the plants and ask them to teach me as well. So by the time I actually got to a point of starting to blend the materials and trying to learn how to spin, the first time I used a drop spindle and I actually got something that resembled wool, I cried. I just sat there and I cried because I thought, I had this deep longing, and I realized how much was lost for a period of time. And yet in that loss there was new life, because I thought it's really not. It's here, but you have to seek the knowledge, seek it where you can find it, look for it. Because there was times where I tried all sorts of things. I would go to the wool stores, and I'd have a little pocket full of mountain goat wool, and these poor ladies I'd be like, so, what do you know about mountain goat wool? And then I pull out my pocket, my little bit of wool, and they'd be like, ew. And I'm like, okay, clearly I'm in the wrong space, and I would turn around and walk back out. And it took me a while to realize that what I needed to do is go to the people who were practicing. So even though some of the practice was with sheep's wool, which is a completely different animal, I could still learn to understand the process of spinning and the movement, and those are really critical parts of understanding how we connect to a plant world, to an animal fiber, how we belong to this space, because with all of these pieces spun together to be worn, to be danced, to be brought to life, to be loved, respected, and cared for, we didn't need 100 blankets. We didn't need 10 pairs of shoes. But we did need this land, and we did need these plants, and we continue to need these things. And I'm not sure how we move forward. I think my hope is certainly to consider encouraging people to deepen their connection to the landscape and to a wilderness space.
I'm going to add another thought onto that too, around the question around the multi-sensory presence in the work. I think that if it is really important for you on a project to have a dance presence or music or some other element, or if it's really important to you that there is a First Nations input or any artist from another cultural community, that it's really essential to embed into the very heart of the creative team itself somebody that is carrying that teaching with it, and that they are part of that decision making from the very beginning and part of the way of making choices and of choosing the framework or structure with which you're going to work.
I think that's an example of when we were doing Storyweaving. It's a play, it's a theater piece. We had asked Spakwaslolam and Gitshayak's dancers to be a part of this theater piece. They're dancers in their traditional right, in their recognition of land and water. The stories that they sing are respective of that. And so in asking them to participate in a theater piece that we that came from the downtown east side, stories of these lived memories of people with residential school, and the dislocation to land, and the dislocation to water, and the dislocation to the economies. We believed it was vitally important to invite, Miquel and Mike Dangeli, Bob Baker, Wes Nahaney, to come, in their groups to participate. And in the protocols of establishing that, they don't do theater. What they do is not theater. And bringing them in to participate in a theatrical presentation, and the protocols that we all had to be mindful of in that process, in the asking, we were very mindful, of what that was. And what we wanted them to demonstrate was those protocols of when people come onto shore. Because we felt that in the play, with all of the human condition of dislocation and land and dislocation to water and to our economies and to our relationship to the land, that we felt that was a necessary element to share at that time in the play.
And I will also add to that bringing in that involvement may mean that it will change the identity of what you're doing in ways that you would never have expected, in terms of the content of it, the form, and everything about how it's experienced. And so that it means guys taking that step, being prepared to listen, to be affected by what you hear, and for change to emerge from it that respects and responds to what has been brought forward.
As a part of the process, and just to share briefly a bit of our experience, a part of the change that we recognized as we worked with both of you, with all three of you, in preparation for Storyweaving, is that they rehearsed a lot. They rehearsed a lot, as all productions do. Well, protocol isn't rehearsed. We went there to understand the space, to be respectful to what was being asked of us, but it took a while in negotiations between my husband and Savannah. How many rehearsals do you want us to attend? So what ended up happening out of that moment of tension was beautiful growth in that. Vancouver Moving Theatre, Renae, everyone that was involved had such trust in the process. And every time Storyweaving was performed, the protocol and the oratory had a foundational basis that was the same, but the words spoken were different every single time because we're in the moment, and we're also changing based on really what was momentum of this project and the passion that started to develop for us around the people involved in the story and the witnesses. And so we're really grateful that you supported us in that. And there was no chasing after us afterwards to say, hey, that wasn't what you said the last time, which I'm sure directors do, you know, because they're thinking of it in terms of a script. But that was the beauty in our experience in working with you guys.
So something of the difference between a reenactment of something that has occurred before or in the past or is being imagined, and an enactment of something that is unfolding in that very moment.
Mm-hmm. So Karen and Margaret, do you have anything that otherwise we can go to the next question?
I think that question's been thoroughly examined and exhumed and dealt with.
We have a question right here. It's so dark in here. So if I miss you, just keep up. I'm trying to see you.
Well, that's perfect because my question is actually for Karen and Margaret. And it relates to the last question because I was just thinking about in terms of different ways of communicating work that is very difficult to talk about. And I'm just going back to what you said earlier, Karen, about trusting the language of the body and that the dialogue began through dance. And I would love to hear from both of you more about that.
Well, first of all, thank you, because I was hoping perhaps to get a question that more directly related to our experience and our work. And so I'd like Margaret to begin. Maybe we could both address this question.
I think for me, the answer in there comes from something that Karen actually opened my eyes to and to contextualize that, I'd like to also say that in working with Karen for such a long time, and because the relationship also has gone through a couple of generations, it almost feels more like the collaboration has been a mentorship in which, regardless of age differences or differences in backgrounds, there's a mentorship that happens with both of us for one another. Once Karen said to me that there's something that I am able to access between myself and what I embody when I wear a mask, when I represent what it is that I'm representing through that dance that only I have the ability to do in that moment and in that space, but it's through me that everyone else in the room also has the opportunity to make that connection. And I think that that was something I was not fully conscious of up until those words were put together to describe it. I think it's that trueness to self, and also the respect that's there in order to be able to see that in one another that provides the ability to bridge all the many things that I think need to be bridged in order to be able to learn from the movement directly and learn from one another directly in that way.
I think if I were to put into my words what Margaret is speaking of, it's a sense of the direct and immediate and present experience of another. And with that comes such words as teachings, as tradition, and yet embodied within our genetic code, within our personal cultural history, which is how you were held, how you were raised, that it's all within our body, and that this, through the language of dance, we can access. And I relate these two questions, to something of the process that Margaret and I have been exploring and developing, that by moving and then basically interrogating the movement that we've done to say, what are we saying? What is the deep understanding or meaning of what I am saying to you, of what you are saying to me? And out of this, the amazing thing is, it's hard to even put it, it's so hard to put this into words, comes something which deepens the understanding, which brings us closer to this peace. We're calling it broken. And we've come to feel that broken is a knock-knock. And that's hard for me to say. Do I have the right to say it? And yet we started from different concepts or fascinations with the life force of energy itself and how our different perspectives could be bridged. And I've come to feel that this paradoxical, extraordinarily difficult knock-knock called broken has asked to be embodied. If that sounds somewhat presumptuous, it is our experience. And again, we can only honor our experience, which is not separate from the teachings and, as I mentioned earlier, the long, long tutelage of First Nations elders to open up my mind. I will just bring up one thing that Doreen Jensen, and I so regret that I can't pronounce her name.
Hathie.
Thank you. Who went from mentorship, who went from actually adversarial to become a mentor, to become a friend. Both of us were with Michael Ames the day before he died. I was with Doreen Jensen shortly before she died. One of the things she said to me was that art, because the subject of what art is has come up, that art in her tradition was a means of accessing the other side, the side that is not available to us on a day-to-day basis. We live in a more surface world, but that plumbing the depth or crossing to the other side to open awareness or consciousness comes through art, and certainly this has been the experience that Margaret and I have been developing and processing in our dance collaboration of the search to embody broken.
That was beautiful. And we have, so we've been asked to stop at 1:10. So if you wanted to, I saw you refer to Margaret. I didn't mean to cut you off. You gestured to her. Do you?
Yeah, if you have something, just to.
Sure.
You're good.
Well, Savannah, looks like you have something.
I just want to add one thing, just an acknowledgement that I missed earlier, that Tracy Williams had contributed a regalia to the Big House event that was part of the ancestors' place and presence. So I want to acknowledge that. And also that Ruth Howard of Jamley's Theatre had been really intrinsic to the conception and formation of this from the very beginning, too. Thank you.
Well, can we, I just can't say enough about this amazing panel. As an art historian, I want to write about all of you guys. So I just, it saddens me when powerful projects don't make it into the history books, because we live in a time period where texts last the longest, and I think it's very important. So I know there's students in the room. I know there's theater students. I recognize you from UBC. Take up some of these good works that you see here throughout the conference as your paper topics. Work in collaboration with these guys to ensure that you stay true to their word. It's too important not to. And Terry just said that there are books available on these projects as well. Do you have one of the books? So they're on the table out there. Renae has a piece in it, so do I, Savannah. Many of the people in the room have short essays in that book to give you a sense of just the wide variety of the work that Vancouver Moving Theatre and the Downtown East Side Festival does. So thank you for your attendance and your attentive listening.